Discover the history of Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, and its legendary visitors, including Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and John Brown. Harpers Ferry is situated between the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers. The area is located in a low-lying floodplain surrounded by mountains. In 1750, the English colonist Robert Harper was given a patent on 125 acres at the present location of the town. Harper was a millwright and saw the potential power that could be harnessed from using the river and constructed a water-powered mill. In 1761, Harper also established ferry service across the Potomac River, making the town a starting point for settlers moving into the Shenandoah Valley. In 1763, the Virginia General Assembly officially established the town of Shenandoah Falls at Mr. Harper's Ferry. Thomas Jefferson and George Washington are arguably the most well-known visitors that Harper's Ferry has ever had. Thomas Jefferson stayed briefly at Harper's Ferry in October 1783 when he was traveling to Philadelphia. While he was visiting, he took notes on his observations of Harper's Ferry, and in one of his passages, he described a rock that sat at a position on top of the hill. That same rock that he described in his notes is now named after him. Jefferson called the site perhaps one of the most stupendous scenes in nature. As the president of the Potomac Company, George Washington traveled to Harper's Ferry to determine what improvements should be made on the Potomac River. Since George Washington was familiar with the town's area in 1794, as the President of the United States, he proposed that one of the 2 U.S. armories and arsenals should be positioned at Harper's Ferry, and within 5 years, construction began. The other U.S. armory and arsenal was to be built in Springfield, Massachusetts. Together, they produced the majority of small arms for the U.S. Armory. As a result, Harper's Ferry was transformed into an industrial town. In 1861, the arsenal was destroyed to prevent capture by the Confederates during the Civil War. Overall, the armory produced more than 600,000 muskets, rifles, and pistols. One of the captains, John Hall, invented the interchangeable parts and firearms that were made at the armory, and his rifle was the first breech-loading rifle made for the U.S. Army. In 1833, industrialization continued when the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal linked Harper's Ferry with Washington, D.C. A year later, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad began train service throughout the town.
We were in the dry goods store at Harpers Ferry. In the 1850s, there were 40 stores on the street, probably 10 dry goods stores. You could buy anything from tinned food to clothing, to tobacco. And 6 miles west from here, according to the sign, for cash, you could buy men, women, and children. It's a slave market. This is a slave state, this is a slave county, this is a slave town. If you're an African American on the street after 10 o'clock at night, you get 10 lashes for being on after curfew, whether you're a slave or free. If you're a slave and your master dies and leaves you free, you can stay in this state for a year. Stay for a year and a day, and we will sell you. And the sale of your body kicks off the county poorhouse. You need an act of the state legislature with your name on it. You need a white sponsor, and you've got to get it renewed every New Year's Day to stay here. If you're a white person or an African American, you come in the store and you criticize slavery, you can spend a year in jail. Well, that will all start to end in a little building that's at the end of the street. It's the smallest building in the gun factory. But in 1859, John Brown, a white man, and a force of 21 African American and white guys raided the gun factory to arm slaves to fight for their freedom.
John Brown was a man of action. He would not be deterred from his mission of abolishing slavery. He was a revolutionary and thought slavery kept America from achieving its goals of being a nation based on equality. Brown was born on May 9, 1800 in Torrington, Connecticut. His parents were abolitionists and taught him at a young age that slavery was wrong. When he was 12 years old, he saw a young slave boy beaten with a shovel. From that day on, Brown decided to become an abolitionist. John Brown strongly believed in God and he prayed daily. He was convinced that God had a mission for him to end slavery. John Brown and his family were not only willing to fight to abolish slavery, but to die to end it. He was different from other abolitionists before his time because he was willing to resort to violence to end slavery. On October 16, 1859, John Brown led a group of 21 men in a raid on the arsenal. One of Brown's men was a fugitive slave, and during that time, assisting fugitive slaves was illegal. He captured several buildings and held slaveholders as hostages. His plan was to use captured weapons in the arsenal to initiate a slave uprising throughout the South. Some of his men were wounded instantly. Nearby, Dr. John Starry heard the gunfire and went to investigate the shooting when he was confronted by John Brown's men. Starry stated that although he was a doctor, he could not help Brown's mortally wounded men, and they allowed him to leave. When Starry was released, he went to Charlestown to alert residents about the raid. Church bells were rung to alarm the citizens and to summon the militia. John Brown and the rest of his men were quickly pinned down by the militia and were forced to take refuge in the engine house nearby to the armory.
Brown had brought 1,000 of these pikes. He knows when he gives guns to the slaves, they won't know how to shoot them because they haven't been allowed to own them. So he's going to train them with these, and this becomes a symbol of John Brown's raid.
The Secretary of War asked for assistance from the Navy Department for a unit of Marines. In the need of an officer to lead the expedition, Lieutenant Robert E. Lee was assigned as the commander, along with Lieutenant Stewart. The unit arrived by train a day after the raid had started and tried to negotiate with John Brown. When Stewart realized that he would not accept his negotiating terms, they stormed the firehouse and captured Brown and his men. Brown was tried for treason against the state of Virginia, convicted, and hanged in Charlestown. With his prosecution, John Brown captured the nation's attention, and his raid was a catalyst for the Civil War.
In the South, the reaction to Brown is to build up the local militia in case anybody interferes with slavery again. Brown had been charged with 3 things: murder, treason against Virginia, and most important was inciting slaves to rebel. Had a mandatory death sentence. In the North, some people believe maybe he's right. Slavery's wrong, we should end it. Not particularly through violence, though. There's a man that they want to run for president named Abraham Lincoln. Spent 2 years in the House of Representatives 20 years before. Lost the Lincoln-Douglas debates. But some people say he'll be a good president because he's against the extension of slavery. So he auditions by giving a speech about John Brown 2 months after Brown was hanged at the Cooper Union in New York. Lincoln's point is very simple. Brown was wrong to use violence, but that does not give the South the right to say we can't continue to agitate against slavery. And enough people agree to elect Lincoln president. The South freaks, the armory is burned here by Union soldiers who have to retreat because this is going to become part of the Confederacy, and the war comes.